mark her Hilula, actually here on the 19th of Tibet, which is going to be in the next couple of days. Her name was Rabbanit Farha Sasson, or Flora Sasson, also popularly known as, I believe she was born back in English in 1859. She passed away in 1936. Well, she was about 77 years of age. A lot can be said within regards to her. She was a famous woman. She was a scholar also. She was a Hebraist, a philanthropist, and a businesswoman. Obviously, very much from India. She was born in Bombay, I think in 18th of November, 1859. She passed away on the 14th of January, 1936. And much can be said within regards to her. I think she was born in 1859 in Bombay. Her father was a man of the name Ezekiel Abraham Gabbai, who was a trader and a businessman who had come to India from Baghdad in Iraq. So I think we're going to look back on some of the people's lives that were decorated within regards to her family. But we're speaking about her primarily today. I think Ezekiel Abraham was a trader and a businessman who came from India, from Baghdad, Iraq. And her mother was Aziza Sasson, who lived between 1839 to 1897. And it's actually interesting. Her, I believe, maternal grandfather was a man named Albert Abdullah David Sassoon. He lived between 1818 to 1896. He was a businessman. He was a philanthropist. He was actually born in Baghdad, if I'm not mistaken, from the famous Sassoon family, respectively. His father happened to have been David Sassoon. And it's very, very key. He is in of itself. Who was David Sassoon? David Sassoon, first of all, lived between 1792 to 1864. Once again, obviously Baghdadi, Jewish merchant, philanthropist, obviously going through that theme over there. He was a treasurer of the Baghdad between 1817 to 1829. I think he had to flee persecution, and the family would end up moving to Bombay in British India, where he would become the leader of the Jewish community in Mumbai after the Baghdadi Jews would immigrate to that city. And he was a founder of the Sassoon family and the founder of the David Sassoon and Sons, which will obviously be later on become the David Sassoon and Co., a trading company owned by his family. He was so successful, I think, especially in opium, as a merchant, who played a huge role, made him known as a merchant prince of Bombay. He used his wealth and really set up a good template for philanthropic and architectural, let's say, projects in of itself. So let's explore a bit within regards to him. I think his father, he himself also was someone famous. Sassoon ben Salah, if I'm not mistaken, was also a wealthy businessman who also served as a chief treasury of the pashas, the governors of Baghdad. So you can see the family in of itself really came from great nobility and philanthropy and from great wealth. I think his father had an honorific title as a sheikh. And his mother was Amam Gabbai, and Sassoon was one of the 7 children, if I'm not mistaken, famous family. And obviously Iraqi, Baghdadi, Jewish origin. He had education in the Hebrew language. I think between 1817 to 1829, he would be obviously the treasurer of Baghdad. And his father, Sassoon ben Salah, was unfortunately persecuted by Dawood Pasha of Baghdad, which would actually prompt Mr. Sassoon and his family to move to Bushehr in Iran. And after, I think, his father's death in 1830, the family would then relocate to Bombay. So let's speak about his career in Bombay. David Sassoon, Mr. David Sassoon, who was the treasurer, he would arrive, I think, in 1832. He would found David Sassoon and Co., a trading company. He would act as a middleman between British textile firms and Persian Gulf's commodity over there, and would gain, let's say, in of itself, like various positions, especially access to the best commodities of the merchants using harbour docks. And he used additional funds that he earned from his harbour properties to finance other foreign traders, Indian purchasers before their return journeys. He also would speak many languages, including Hindi, if I'm not mistaken, and worked, let's say, a command to the language. I think his major competitors were Parsis, for example, or Parsis, you could say, whose profits were built on their domination of the Sino-Indian opium trade since the 1820s. I think by the 1830s, Mr. Sassoon became one of the wealthiest people in India. And then Mr. Sassoon would begin searching for opportunities also in China in the 1840s. And I think there was a famous treaty in 1842 of the Treaty of Nanking, which would open China to British traders, if I'm not mistaken. Mr. Sassoon would have a son of the name Elias David Sassoon, who was also an Indian Baghdadi Jewish merchant. He was a son, obviously, of David Sassoon, and earned an immense fortune alongside his family, and was the founder of the E.D. Sassoon and Co., a trading company, respectively. And so in his business, I think Mr. Sassoon developed, let's say, a lucrative triangular trade, Indian opium, cotton, which was brought to China, in which, I think for return, which Sassoon received silver, tea, silks, and would send these, I think, products to England, and from Britain, finished products and cash were brought back to India and used to purchase more opium in of itself. So he was very, very famous. Let's speak about his personal family. I think Mr. Sassoon himself was married to Hannah Joseph, and they had 4 children. I think she passed away in 1826. He would later get married to Farha Hayim, and they would have 10 children, including Albert. I think his sons include Albert, Elias, Sassoon David, Reuben, Arthur, Aaron, Solomon, and Frederick. And his daughters were Mazal Tov, Amam, Kate, Rebecca, and Moselle. And I think in Bombay, he would himself continue, let's just say, to dress and have the manners of Baghdadi Jews in himself. I think his sons were allowed by him to adopt English manners, let's just say. And I think in 1853, he became a British subject and signed the Oath of Allegiance to Queen Victoria in Hebrew. And I don't think he had great command, let's just say, in English itself. And he was a very Orthodox Jew, including especially Shabbat observance in of itself, and lived in various different prominent places in of itself. His son Albert, I think, moved to London eventually in 1874 and became a baronet and married into the Rothschild family. Now, I think Sassoon's 8 sons, all entered various areas of the Sassoon family's business, and he passed away himself, Mr. Sassoon, on the 7th of November 1864. So Mr. David Sassoon was a famous treasure, and he actually looks with nobility with a famous Jewish rabbinic clothing in it. So he was obviously an Orthodox Jew in of itself. But we're going to speak more about that, and his philanthropy and legacy will very much live on. He became a leader of the Jewish community of Bombay by the 1860s and had various charity trusts, which I think even continue today, if I'm not mistaken, from his private income. And his businesses, institutions, philanthropy will help him develop social, educational, commercial network for Jewish immigrants in Bombay. He established a David Sassoon benevolent institution to educate young Jewish men who immigrated, let's say, from areas that include Baghdad, Syria, Iran, and Afghanistan, if I'm not mistaken. And I think there'll be later on the famous David Sassoon Library, which would be named after him, which is a famous library and heritage structure in Mumbai, in India. Let's say center of the city, which come obviously for studying in of itself. Also, the Magen David Synagogue, which is obviously an Orthodox synagogue in Bombay, if I'm not mistaken, in the Maharashtra area in India. I think a David Sassoon Hospital, also known as the JJ Hospital. The Messina Hospital in Bombay, the Knesset Eliyahu, which is synagogue, I think also also known as a Blue Synagogue. That was the Sassoon Dock in Mumbai, the Bank of India, the David Sassoon Reformatory and Deaf School in Mumbai, Ohel David Synagogue in Pune, if I'm not mistaken. This is another famous place in of itself, named after him. I think it was actually in the year 1863 when it was actually began to be built, if I'm not mistaken, and a most magnificent structure, let's just say, and one of the famous synagogues also of India. There's obviously the Sassoon Hospital also in that similar area, and the Lady Rachel Sassoon Dispensary, and David Sassoon Elderly and Destitute Persons Home, and the Sassoon House, also known as the Peace Hotel, if I'm not mistaken. Very, very interesting enough, and contributed to various different important landmarks, I believe, in India. So that's just speaking about David Sassoon over here. We're speaking about Albert also. Albert lived, as we said before, between 1818 to 1896, and very much would become part of, let's say, England at that point in time, in 1873s. And I think he had a younger brother, Solomon David Sassoon, who himself lived between 1841 to 1894. He is a famous person, also we spoke about before, who was born in Bombay, and I think spent a window of time in China to be an assistant of David Sassoon, his father, and would serve as the head of David Sassoon and Co. chairman also of the Sassoon Spinning and Weaving Company and the Sassoon and Alliance Silk Company, if I'm not mistaken, and will also serve as a chairman of the board of the Port Canning and Land Improvement and Oriental Life Assurance, if I'm not mistaken. And he was actually sitting on the board of the Bank of Bombay and the Mumbai Port Trust, if I'm not mistaken, and he was also known as famous philanthropist, president of the Bombay branch of the Anglo-Jewish Association from 1894. Also, once again, obviously, a religious Orthodox Jew, so that's something that we must obviously talk about. So what's interesting, we're talking about Rabbinit, or Mrs. Flora Sasson. Mr. Solomon David Sassoon was her husband. So remember, Flora Sassoon would pass away, if I'm not mistaken, in, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, in 1936, way after he passed away, I think 42 years after. So she was born in 1859, so she was 18 years younger than Mr. Solomon David. So let's go back to Flora. I think Flora and David would, Flora and Solomon would have, I believe, 3 children. David Sassoon, who lived between 1880 to 1942, Rachel Sassoon, who lived between 1877 to 1952, and Mosella, if I'm not mistaken, passed away in 1921. So let's explore a bit more about Flora, and we'll speak about her children in due course, because so let's go back over here to her. I think she went to a Catholic school and was tutored privately by rabbis from Baghdad. Very interesting enough. By the age of 17, she could speak various languages, including Hebrew, Aramaic, Hindustani, English, French, and German, which is absolutely astounding, especially at that point in time. And the Kane's Post would describe her as one of the world's most learned women, reported. Oh, very interesting. And she would take over her husband's trading business in India. Shortly after he passed away, she obviously was a religious Jew. She would always travel with her own prayer. There's a book apparently reported over. It was important for her to have minions surrounding her when she could pray. And she was also a strong supporter of the Balfour Declaration, and would consider herself definitely as a Zionist, one that really supported the resettling of the land of Israel. She would study Torah and wrote articles about Rashi, reported over. I think much of what was published in the Jewish Forum. And I think in 1924, she presided over the annual speech day at the famous Jews College in London. She stressed the importance of Jewish education, and she would often host Middle Eastern Indian luncheons and dinners with various different Jewish foods, let's just say, obviously to the correct kashrut standards. And she would travel with her own personal ritual slaughterer, someone that will make sure that the kashrut is up to date. I think she was a supporter also of someone named Walder Meir Hafkind, according to Wikipedia, who he lived between 1860 to 1930. He was a Russian-French bacteriologist known for his pioneering work in vaccines at that point in time. And I think he would very much intervene and make a vaccine against cholera, which was, I think, various different times proved to be a deadly plague in various parts of the world. And would, very, very interesting, and would encourage people to take this. I think she would eventually move to England. She often donated to Jews around the world who appealed to her for money in their hours of need. Very interesting. Okay, so as we said before, Mrs. Flora Sasson got married to Mr. Solomon David Sasson, who we'll speak about in a minute, the son of her great-grandfather, David Sasson, who we mentioned about from the start, by his second wife, Farha Hayim, 1814 to 1886. And very, very interesting. So she married her own great uncle, let's just say, her mother's paternal uncle, and they had 3 children. So that was David Solomon Sasson, Rachel Sassoon Ezra, and Moselle Sassoon. Is just reading over Wikipedia. I think they lived in Bombay. Now, after her husband passed away, she moved to England. She and her children visited Baghdad for the Jewish High Holy Days, I think, come 1910. And she was introduced by the wall of Baghdad, Hussein Nadim Pasha, and the chief rabbi, Ezra Dangor. There were, I think she corresponded with them. There were correspondence in writing between the family and Chacham Yosef Chaim, interesting enough, the great rabbi of Baghdad, also popularly known as Ben Yishai. And very, very great work. And he obviously passed away in 1909. And very interesting. She passed away, I believe, in 1936 in her mansion in London. So she, I think, had a correspondence with the chief rabbi at the time, Rabbi Ezra Dangor, a rabbi we've spoken about here on this series, I believe, on several occasions before. Let's explore a bit within regards to him, because he was very much a famous rabbi. The chief rabbi was Ezra Dango. I think it was his Hilula quite recently, if I'm not mistaken. He lived between 1848 to 1930. He was a chief rabbi of Baghdad, especially between 1923 to 1926, the founder and the first publishing company in Baghdad, and was born, I think, in Baghdad, obviously, and educated under Chacham Abdullah Smith, very interesting enough. He was a shochet, he was a mohel also, and I think from 1880 to 1886, he would work as a scribe in charge of writing documents issued by the Baghdad's Bet Din. He was a chief rabbi in Rangoon in Burma between 1893 to 1894, and but had to return, I think, eventually due to ill health in 1895 to Baghdad. In 1904, he opened the first printing press in Baghdad, which printed Arabic textbooks as well as books in Hebrew, and was author of several books and commentaries on the Torah. I think he had 5 children: Sion, Abdullah, Yosef, Pharka, obviously, who get married to Shaul Basri, Eliyahu, and Moshe, if I'm not mistaken. And I think his grandfather was Naim Eliyahu Dango, who lived between 1914 to 2015, a staggering 101 years. And of the wife of the latters. And yeah, very, very interesting. So that is... and I think he's a great-grandfather of the famous David Allen Ezra Dango, who's a famous British businessman and philanthropist, if I'm not mistaken. So that's very, very interesting. So actually a famous picture of Rabbi Ezra Dango with his family you can actually find online. But anyway, we're speaking about Rabbanit, or Mrs. Farga Sasson, a famous woman of the time. She lived in Bombay, as we said before, and she would pass away in her mansion in 1936. Let's explore, but we're going to explore a little bit within regards to her children, including David Solomon Sasson. We're going to take a short break just for a minute, and we'll be back in 1 minute to continue this video. So just wait a minute, and we will be back, friend. Hi, Shalom, everyone. Thanks for being patient as we are exploring the history with regards to Mrs. Flora Sasson, a very, very famous Jewish Indian businesswoman of yesteryear. So let's speak a bit about her children, including David Solomon Sasson. Who was he? He lived between December 1880, I think the 8th of December, to 10th of August 1942. He was also known as Mr. David Suleiman Sasson. He was a bibliophile. He was also grandson, obviously, of the Baghdadi Jewish leader of the 19th century, someone named David Sasson. He was born in Bombay to, obviously, Solomon and Mrs. Flora Sasson, who was together. And I think he would move to London in the year 1902 after Mr. Solomon passed away in 1894. He was a manuscript collector also. He traveled extensively with an intent of collecting Hebrew books and manuscripts, which later I think was catalogued in a 2-volume book entitled the Ohel David. The importance, let's say, of his private collection of books and manuscripts, let's say, can't be estimated in himself. He affords scholars the opportunity to examine some 24 distinct liturgical rites used by different Jewish communities in the 19th century, especially in Aleppo, Ashkenazi, Egyptian, Italian, Northern African, Morocco, Tunis, Tlemcen, in Karaite, Sephardi, Spanish, naturally, Bnei Yisrael, Cochin, Turkish, Yemen, and others. I think he owned 412 manuscripts and 20 incunables, and the rarest, let's say, which was retrieved from Baghdad. I think in 1914, the Sassoon collection numbered 500 manuscripts. And between 1914 to 1932, let's say there was a catalogue published, the manuscripts would go to 1,220, of which I think 1,153 were all fully described very much in this catalogue. And it's interesting, when Mr. David and his mother visited Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, in 1925, he would acquire the decisions of rabbis, and Isaiah ben Mali, Trani, the elder, if I'm not mistaken, 13th century, on Hulin, and I think a very, very much one of the most important manuscripts obtained, I think, in his Sefer Halachot Pesukot, I think, of Rabbi Yehuda Gaon, if I'm not mistaken. Very, very interesting. It was a work. I think he lived between 757 to 761. He was the head of the yeshiva in Surah. It was a work that he obtained from a Jew in Yemen in 1911. And I think it was written in Babylonia or Persia in the 9th or 10th century, if I'm not mistaken, and various other things. I think his most, let's say, prized acquisition was the Farhi Bible, a codex, with more than 359 illustrations, which he purchased in Aleppo, and I think was written by Elisha Krekes in Province between the years 1366 and 1383, and I think kept in a bank vault in Switzerland at the moment. Another treasure was a Damascus codex, let's just say, which he brought in Damascus in 1915. Obviously, it was acquired by the Jewish National and University Library in 1975, and significant acquisition, let's say, in September 1923, I think it was a Diwan of Samuel Hanagid, which the Oxford University Press published with an introduction by Sassoon in 1924. I think many of the manuscripts was collected by Sassoon were auctioned by Sotheby's of London in Zurich and New York between the years 1975 to 1994. And in order this would actually be done to satisfy, let's say, Sassoon's estate's British tax obligations. I think most of what remains of Solomon Sassoon's private collection of Hebrew manuscripts is stored in the University of Toronto in Canada. And I think there's a cluster of manuscripts, a smallish one from his estate, which is available in the British Library, if I'm not mistaken, which is also very, very interesting to point out over here. And I think it was, purchased at Sotheby's auction sales in the 1970s. Now, it's interesting. Let's talk a bit. We're going to talk about his son, Solomon David Sassoon, in a minute. But let's now speak about the two other children of Mrs. Farha Sasson, the famous woman, Flora Sasson, who we're speaking about today. There was Rachel Sassoon Ezra. She lived between 1877 to 1952, if I'm not mistaken. Another famous woman of her time, and someone that very much we will just speak about for a minute at the moment. So very, very interesting. Friends, anyone tuning in live, welcome to our community as we are exploring the history of Mrs. Flora Sasson. It's Rachel Sasson, or Ezra, lived between 1877 to 1952, also known as Lady Ezra. And she would get married to the famous banker David Elias Ezra, who passed away himself in 1947, was a prominent member of the Baghdadi Jewish community and was a director and an owner of the Reserve Bank of India, if I'm not mistaken. So also, once again, very, let's say, prominent. And Rachel was obviously the daughter of Sir Solomon David Sasson and Flora Gabai Sasson, and part of the Baghdadi Jewish community, which we have to point out. I think obviously lived in England as a young woman, helped a widowed mother obviously run the father's business. She was active in the Countess of Dufferin Fund, if I'm not mistaken, and was commissioner of the Girl Guides for Calcutta. And I think in 1925 wrote a travel brochure from Damascus to Baghdad, a trip across the Syrian desert, if I'm not mistaken, and wrote a greeting to the members of the Parliament of the World's Religions, if I'm not mistaken, in 1938. And she would open her home during the wars, first and second, to Jewish servicemen and women while they were based in Calcutta, if I'm not mistaken. The British government awarded her the Gold Kaiser I Hind Medal, I think in 1947. And in 1951, she donated a Sephardic sepulchre to the Harvard Synagogue. Harvard Synagogue, I think, is in Australia, in Tasmania, if I'm not mistaken, and was distinguished for her philanthropy and social science also. She got married to the banker and community leader Sir David Elias Ezra in 1912. And very, very interesting. Let's just say two powerful Jewish families will get together here, very much encompassed inside this marriage. Her husband passed away in 1947. She died in 1952, 74 years of age, in Calcutta. The Rachel and David Ezra Archive, I think, is part of the Sassoon family archive at the National Library of Israel, we have to point out over here. Very, very interesting. So let's speak more about, now they had another child, someone named Moselle Sassoon. So let's speak a bit more about the grandson, Isaac S.D. Sassoon, who was he, and the Solomon David Sassoon. Let's speak about both of them. First, let's speak about Solomon. He lived between 1915 to 1985, was an educator. He was actually a Rabbi Solomon David Sassoon, and a philanthropist, a fundraiser, and a collector, once again, of Jewish manuscripts. Obviously came from great authors, Mr. David Sassoon, Solomon Sassoon, and we've spoken about the forefathers in of itself. And he was tutored by someone named Gemara, by Rabbi Eliezer Desser, famous Rabbi, Talmudic scholar, and a Jewish philosopher of his day, Mashkiach Ruchani, in the famous Ponevezh yeshiva. Now, Mr. Sassoon made original contributions to, let's say, linguistic analysis, philosophy, and biblical scholarship. I think in 1953 and 1964, he declined requests to put his name forward as a candidate for the position of Sephardi Chief Rabbi of Israel, but you can see people wanted him to maybe have this position. He had great interest in literature, and and I think he built a library in Letchworth in England to house his father's collections of Jewish manuscripts. And in Bula, some of these holdings, I think, were auctioned by Saad Bees, as we talked about before, between 1975 to 1994. Very, very interesting enough. And he passed away in May 1985. Let's speak about Rabbi Isaac S.D. Sassoon. I think he's also a key figure in this family. He was born in 1946. He's a rabbi at the moment, a chacham, a scholar, educator, one of the leading scholars in the Sephardic world, without doubt. Obviously born in the Sassoon family. He studied in the famous Gateshead Yeshiva, in Yeshivot in Israel. I believe he owns a PhD in literature. Very, very interesting enough. And from the University of Lisbon, and would be an academic also. He published books on ranges of subjects, on scriptural commentary, we have to point out, issues of current concern to the Jewish community, and teaches institutes of traditional Judaism and lectures widely, I believe. And obviously highly esteemed. I think he's very much in his community, if I'm not mistaken, contributed to maintenance of heritage of the Babylonian and Jewish community, and provided the Syrian Jewish community with, let's say, an updated and corrected Siddur reflecting community's tradition, which is very, very, I think, important also to point out. I think in 2011 he published a book called The Status of Women in Jewish Tradition, addressing the particular religion's traditions outlook on women, which is an important work. And I think he refers to the Torah, Talmud, Dead Sea Scrolls in exploring authentic position on the continuum of the patriarchal condensation. I think his goal in writing the book was to give authentic answers to popular questions. That's something that we very much have to point out over here. Anyone tuning in live, welcome to our community at the moment as we're exploring a few of the highlights with regards to Mrs. Flora Sasson, who was a famous woman and a philanthropist of her time from India, a woman I think we've spoken about here on various occasions before, which we have to point out also. So welcome to our community. And don't forget to subscribe. So, he had different works. Also, we have to point out the status of women in Jewish tradition. That was one of Rabbi Isaac Sasson's works. The Uriel de Costa, if I'm not mistaken, and the Murano Factory, a Portuguese Inquisition and its New Christians. The Sidur ve Ha'arev, I think it was printed in 2007, and the Sidur Alatz Libi, if I'm not mistaken, and various famous articles also we have to point out. So he actually grew up speaking Judeo-Arabic, if I'm not mistaken. So that was, let's just say, in of itself, seen as a very important feat and something very much, let's just say, that was very outstanding at that point in time. So you can see the family itself, the Sassoon family was a famous family. Flora Sasson, one of the famous women, definitely over the last couple of 100 years. That's something that we definitely very much have to point out over here as we, let's just say, explore the history within regards to a famous woman. And there's many articles also within regards to her on the internet you can actually find on many, many different places. And in great depth, we have to point out, I think the American Sephardi Foundation Jewish Women Archive would pay tribute to her, her philanthropist and her business sense in of itself. This very large article in the American Sephardi website, which actually speaks about her in a great amount of detail, if I'm not mistaken. And very, very interesting over here. And many, many other articles. She was described as walking like a queen also, talk like a sage, and entertain like an oriental potentate. That's how described, if I'm not mistaken, according to a historian, someone named Cecil Roth, if I'm not mistaken. And she was an expert on Sephardi doctrine and practice, and was very much unparalleled, let's just say, with regards to it. I think she, very, very interesting. She was a granddaughter of David Sasson, as we mentioned before, and obviously her mother was Mrs. Aziza, and her father was Ezekiel. I think she was one of 6 sons, 6 daughters, 12 children, if I'm not mistaken, and of whom I think she was eldest. She was known as Farha in the East, but she would use the word Flora in England. Very interesting. And I think her mother was also known as someone learned and scholarly. Also, we have to point out, she knew many languages, as we spoke about here from the beginning. There was ties to China, obviously India in the opium, and had a very, very lavish house in Bombay called Napian Lodge, if I'm not mistaken, which had its own synagogue attached to it. And let's just say, very, very interesting. So I think one of the Sassoons, if I'm not mistaken, I think Mr. Solomon Sassoon, who lived between 1841 to 1894, if I'm not mistaken, would actually recite all 150 biblical psalms to Tehillim every morning before he went to office. And apparently his wife did also, this is according to the jwa.org website over here, Jewish Women's Awareness website, if I'm not mistaken. And she was very active in public affairs. She was elected president of the Jewish community over there, if I'm not mistaken. And much can actually be said within regards to her. She would take care in 1894 of business responsibilities while raising 3 children at the time. And according to the catalogue of the 2023 exhibit about the Sassoons at the Jewish Museum of New York, she was the only woman in the family to oversee a branch of the firm, apparently reported over. And I think by the end of 1904, she was admitted as a full partner in all firm's offices around the world. She would run the critical Bombay office for 6 years by herself. And a historian named Joseph Sassoon, in his 2022 book on the Sassoon family, gives various details of Mrs. Flora's business, let's say, acumen and attributes. Much of the Sassoons business's successes to her professional talent and actions. She reorganized and reported over the Bombay office into 9 separate departments. She established more tough rules of borrowing and lending, introduced many professional practices such as a uniform system of writing clear business reports. If I'm not mistaken, it's actually quoted over. She engineered a truce between the firm and its breakaway, E.D. Sassoon, which was headquartered, I believe, in Shanghai, to allow for cooperation and reduce competition. And she was a very successful businesswoman, very impressed her colleagues and employees with her attention to detail and, let's just say, retentive memory. And as business manager, she was very well thought of, both in India and internationally. We talked about the cholera and how she would support a Jewish bacteriologist, Waldemar Mordechai Hafkin, with regards to developing this vaccine at that stage in time. And she would really take on various different importances with regards to the business and really hold, let's say, the fort in of itself. And very, very interesting. We're going to speak a bit about her life in England. I think it's important to actually speak about it, but just beforehand, now that you're all here at the moment, just to say over, please, everyone subscribe to the channel and join our community, because we really are a community here, and there's no community like ours, friends, over here, as we explore great characters. It's actually the first time we happen to be speaking about a woman who was let's just say, someone very, very important in previous years, Mrs. Flora Sasson over here. And we've spoken about many people in our family inside the series. Also before, I think several months back, maybe spoken about 3 or 4 of the members of our family, which is something very important just to point out over here. And once again, I'll tell everyone over here, please, we are a community. It's all about us together, where we learn, we educate about the next generation, the previous generations, and so on and so forth. I think it's very, very important, especially nowadays, especially to let the great Jewish personalities that there were of previous times. And it's very, very much a great privilege over here to speak about that. So very much so. So that's very interesting. And don't forget, if anyone is new here to the channel, to the community, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And you were always here for all of you. And community, we like to help each other and learn and educate, and at a really, really premium level, we try to do that over there. So it's let's say very, very important just for us in of itself. That's a very, very interesting. You can see she was very well traveled also. And Mrs. Flora Sasson, I don't know if she would go by the title rabbinate. She was definitely very, very learned. That's something that we definitely must point out also about her. And much has been said over from other people also, which is very, very interesting. We're just going to update the picture over here with in regards to her. We're going to try and get a bit more information, because she was a very, very famous woman. And I think there's other rabbis here of current day that would actually speak about her, which you also must point out over here. So I recommend everyone to watch over the previous videos recorded about the Mr. Solomons over there. We spoke about Solomon David Sassoon, Rabbi Isaac Sassoon, and very much in detail. And Mrs. Farkas Sassoon was very, very famous. We spoke about David Salimon Sassoon, another famous person, obviously. And so on and so forth. It was famous rabbinic dynasty. That's something that we very much have to point out over here. So very, very interesting. I thought it would be a nice special edition to speak about this topic. It's just going to feel about Iraqi Jewry during the 1900s. And your friends, we're a community here. If anyone is interested in watching any of these videos, please watch these videos, share these videos also to other people. And really, many people have benefited tremendously. There's always fantastic feedback, I have to point out, within regards to videos, and I really, really appreciate it, and I value everyone's excellent input into the channel, and so on and so forth, as we've got many important contents. We've already recorded about 1,400 plus videos of great rabbis of yesteryear. We have done biography videos about them, which I see as extremely integral in every single thing that we are doing, and very, very important also to all our projects. That's something that very much I have to point out. If you feel anyone's interested in watching these videos, please share these videos also to other people and help other people join this wonderful communities of ours and grow much and so on and so forth. How important we actually find that over here. Wishing you all a good night. We are coming actually into the book of Shemot at the moment, which is also very, very exciting and important. But yeah, hopefully it's going to be a better Shemot than the previous Bereshit was. Bereshit was also good, thank God. We should always never try and not complain. Everything Hashem does at the end is for the best, as we can point out. So yeah, I think it's very, very important to talk about that. So very interesting. It was a special edition here. And yeah, wishing you well. If anyone needs anything, you can let me know. And thank God we've got a nucleus, let's just say, board over here of people watching and learning, educating within regards to these various important topics. So we're speaking about the famous rabbinite, or Mrs. Flora Sasson, and she was a Hebraist, a businesswoman, a philanthropist. She buried in Har Azeitim, I believe, in 1936 on the 14th of January. And she was 76 years of age already at that stage in time. So that's they very, very much have to point out over here. Now, before I go away, I want to share a word just with you. I'm just going to take another short half a minute break, and we'll come back just to give one last word within regards to the Sassoon family. We'll just talk about who were all the relatives also. That's something I don't want to miss out. So I'll just be 1 minute. Yeah, everyone, thanks for being patient and waiting over here. We're going to say a few more words with regards to the famous Sassoon family, but while you're all at it at the moment and watching live, please don't forget to smash the subscribe button and subscribe to our community over here, as we've got fantastic content. We know the Sassoon family itself, I think, originated in various places, including Baghdad and Aleppo in Syria, and there's so many other members of the family we can speak about. There was also We've mentioned many of them, but also we didn't mention about Sassoon, David Sassoon, who lived between 1838 to 1867, and the banker, Indian and Iraqi, let's say, and a philanthropist. Also, Arthur Abraham David Sassoon was also an English banker and a socialite, let's just say. Sir Sassoon David, who was a first banneret, who we spoke about before, and was a textile mill owner he happened to have been. Sir Edward Albert was one I think we touched upon. He passed away in 1912. Rachel Beer, she was an Indian-born British newspaper editor and the Sunday Times and the Observer. She passed away in 1927. Alfred Ezra, another famous man, he was an OBE he was decorated with, passed away in 1955, if I'm not mistaken. Sir Victor, he passed away in 1961. He was a British businessman and a hotelier. Captain Siegfried, if I'm not mistaken, English war poet, happens to be Sir Philip, was a third baronet. He was from the family. Sybil Rachel Betty Cecile, if I'm not mistaken, had prominent positions, also a chief of staff of the woman of Royal Naval Service. Interesting enough. George Thornycroft Sassoon was a British scientist, electrical engineer. So you can see many of them had prominent members of various different positions. I think James Mayer Sassoon, or Baron Sassoon, is a British businessman and politician. And Adrian Sassoon, an English art dealer, currently. Catherine Harrison, born in 1961, an American author also. So you can see, I think the family itself was, obviously, as I mentioned before, originally chief treasurers, especially Sassoon Ben Sally, if I'm not mistaken, and took on various different importances in of itself. Some of these people did. Unfortunately, there was anti-Semitism all throughout. So, but there's so much that can be said within regards to it. And very, very important to learn more about it. Albert Abdullah, we spoke about before. Rachel Sassoon Beer, also we spoke about beforehand. There was also Joseph Sassoon, who first went to Saloniki, Greece, and later to Aleppo, if I'm not mistaken, and established a merchant house. And later his business interests would spread to various places, including Cairo, Alexandria, Morocco, Italy, a shipping company. And he would have sons, including Moses Sassoon, if I'm not mistaken, passed away in 1909. And very interesting enough. Eliyahu Nissim Yosef Sassoon was also another famous person. I think he passed away in 1992. Born also in Aleppo, he had education in Victoria College, if I'm not mistaken, and worked in Alexandria eventually, and had various different importances, as I say, in of itself. And I think today the Sassoon and Co. is the only surviving firm of both branches of the Sassoon dynasty. The firm is a private equity and investment banking firm, providing investment, management, corporate and trade finance, and global advisory service to its clients. The firm maintains strong focus in US and Israeli markets. Very interesting. I think there's a whole family tree also available on the internet. So that's very, very interesting. And thanks everyone tuning in live. Don't forget to join our community and please subscribe to channel, friends. We are nearing 8,500 subscribers, so really, really appreciate it. If you, all you fantastic people out there, can get out there and subscribe, join, and educate, and so on and so forth. How important it is for the next generation. And please drop me comments. Also, I really, really appreciate it. And at the same time, thanks very much, everyone, for all the great stuff. So I think it's a good opportune time to call it a day over here and browse over all the other great, fantastic contents and importances that we're coming here on this channel, because there is a lot of information we are trying to garner up, and very, very important in of itself. So that's something just we would very much appreciate and learn more. Don't forget to follow our talks. We try and talk all over Israel, which is very, very important, and we do short clips all over various different places. Also, that's something that's to point out. Also, very interesting. So, so very interesting. So, thanks everyone for watching, and be well. And as I said before, we are going to come inside the territory of Parshat Shemot this week. So, very, very interesting. So, thanks for watching, and be well. Thank you.